Welcome back. Sorry about that, John.
I guess we got confused in the break there. Go ahead, JD. I'm sorry.
Just a welcome back. I'll welcome you side by side, and you as well. And obviously, this is a somber anniversary, John, but there are more headlines to talk about.
Yeah, we'll pick back up with a story in Boston, but we'll move on real quickly and update everybody about that standoff still brewing in a way out in Nevada right now. A rancher in the Bureau of Land Management, they've had things subside for a little bit, at least for right now. The BLL claims that Cliven Bundy owes hefty back taxes for letting his cattle graze on federal land, but Bundy says the land has been in his family since the 1800s. Now, after protests from Bundy and hundreds of others, some armed, the BLM backed down momentarily. Now, according to data from the Congressional Research Service, more than half of the West is federally owned. You see that land right there in yellow. 7 western states have demanded that the federal government return these lands, but one prominent politician isn't ready to give up that fight.
Well, it's not over. We can't have an American people that violate the law and just walk away from it. So it's not over.
So what exactly did Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid mean by that? Well, he, of course, is injecting himself into the dispute. He says that we can't have the American people violate the law and walk away from it. You heard that in that soundbite. Of course, there is still some concern about how Harry Reid's son, Rory, might be involved in this, representing a Chinese company that has also reportedly had designs on that same land. Now, moving on, the shooting and rampage at 2 Jewish community centers has now officially been classified as a hate crime. Prosecutors filed those charges, state charges, today, including 1 count of capital murder. The alleged shooter, Fraser Glenn Cross, who also goes by the name of Fraser Glenn Miller, has a long history of anti-Semitism and racism. He has been a well-known white supremacist for decades and served time in prison back in the 1980s. Now, the mother, who lost both her son and her father in the shooting, continues to show all of us what it means to face this kind of tragedy with strength and dignity.
He had 2 songs that he thought he might get the chance to sing too, but the first one was On the Street Where You Live from My Fair Lady. And then if they were going to give him a chance to sing again, he was going to sing You Will Miss Me When I'm Gone.
Well, authorities say they had to verify through investigation if there was in fact enough evidence to warrant hate crimes prosecution. Of course, that has happened now with those state charges being filed. Prosecutors also say they are confident that they could have enough information here to seek the death penalty if additional federal charges are filed as well. Well, so we'll update those stories throughout the course today. Of course, right now we want to bring in Pete Hoekstra, the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, to talk about some other issues as well.
Pete, a somber anniversary in Boston, the 1-year observance of what transpired, the Boston bombings at the Marathon. And as we were discussing this morning what transpired today, I thought back to our time on Capitol Hill and that time post 9/11, where obviously when an act of domestic terror is committed, we hear about it, we talk about it, but a number of things, as I understand it, were averted. Now, I don't know what kind of freedom we have to discuss these things today, but without getting into too much detail, from your vantage point, having served as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, how many domestic terror threats do you think we thwarted post 9/11?
Well, I think it's hard to put a number on it, JD, but by having a very, very aggressive stance overseas, clearly we have diminished the capabilities of radical jihadist groups to launch attacks into the United States. Now, I think that has changed in the last couple of years. We're now seeing radical jihadist movements on the march across the Middle East, across northern Africa, just a major bombing in Nigeria in the last couple of days. Each time that happens, each time that march continues to spread, 2 things happen. It emboldens radical jihadists, and it creates more opportunities for organizations to have safe havens to, really go after the crown jewels. The crown jewel, a successful attack in the United States.
And Pete, we were discussing this with Howie Carr just before the break. The notion of the cult of the perverse cult of celebrity that enshrouds these terrorists, especially the brothers in Boston, or the surviving brother, and akin to that is this incredibly misnamed notion of political correctness. In terms of American attitudes toward those who would commit acts of war against the United States. Have the American people, culturally speaking, turned a corner to identify with those who would attack us?
Well, I'm not sure we've turned a corner, but we saw this with the Fort Hood shooting a number of years ago, and remember, I think Hassan is still being prosecuted not as an act of terrorism, but domestic violence. And it's kind of like, excuse me, this was clearly terrorism. The Obama administration they've turned a different corner. They've turned the corner, from away from terrorism to accepting it, which is think of what you're kind of talking about, which we're also seeing now, the political correctness. I'm glad you brought that up. You see a case where someone like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, this is a person who is advocating and articulating for women's rights. She was going to get an award and an honorary degree from Brandeis University and talk about how women and women's rights suffer in certain countries under Muslim rule, under Muslim influence, some of the practices of Islam, radical Islam, and how they treat women. Brandeis University, after 24 hours of protest by organizations like CARE and the CARE organization, they decided to pull it back. Not because they found out something new about Ayaan Hirsi Ali. You can go on the internet and you can see all of the work that she's done and the things that she said, but there was just a little bit of friction. Rather than the university being open to a discussion of how women's rights are affected under certain brands of Islam, they said, nah, we ain't going to talk about that. We're going to pull her off the agenda and pull her honorary degree. Outrageous.
Well, Pete, let's shift focus, because as we get together this morning, obviously our primary concern is what transpires within the borders of the United States, but updates from the Ukraine now, where apparently one of the pro-Russian candidates for office was beaten this morning, at least the early reports we're getting, and now talk of a civil war being imminent in the Ukraine. Your evaluation of what's transpiring there?
Well, as you and I have talked, and we've covered this issue over the last week to 10 days on pretty much a daily basis, I'm a strong believer that this continues to play exactly the way that Putin wants it to play out. He wants instability and chaos in Ukraine. It creates the leverage, it creates the argument for Russia to play a bigger part of eastern Ukraine to protect the ethnic Russian-speaking peoples of eastern Ukraine. Playing out, the level of violence continues to slowly escalate. This is going all Putin's way. Europe and the U.S., they can't get together on sanctions. They can't get together on a strategy. And Putin is just slowly achieving the ends that he wants.
Pete, we'd like you to stay with us, because we want to come back, return to these shores, and return to a discussion of attitude, specifically what is transpiring in journalism. People who should champion the First Amendment apparently finding a soft spot for those who have been involved in controversial policies. We will get to that. And of course, we welcome your comments via social media on this anniversary of the Boston bombing. Are we ever going to figure out that border security is national security? You see our contact points there. We'll be right back.